is Spichlerze Island, which means granary island. It's called that because in the 14th century, more than 300 granaries operated on this island. And only one of the original granaries survived intact during World War II, and 20 have been rebuilt, and the rest, some of them have been left in ruins, and some of them have been completely leveled and they didn't bother rebuilding them. I'm on Spichlerze Island, and this is its most famous landmark. It's called a baszta, which is a Polish term for a medieval defense tower, and this one is actually known as the milk churn or milk tower because it kind of looks like a churn that they would hold milk in. Tak. Even though Gdansk is the city where World War II started on September 1st, 1939 with the invasion of the Nazis, it wasn't until 1945 when the city was actually completely destroyed, and it wasn't the Germans but the Russians. In March of 1945, the Russian forces tried to capture the city of Gdansk from the Germans, and after 7 days of fighting they succeeded, and that's what left 90% of the city in ruins. After the war, the entire city was rebuilt, well, almost the entire city, because as you see here, a few large ruins have been left over. This, for example, used to be a granary, so people decided to leave a few of the buildings in ruins as a reminder to future generations about the city's violent history and the devastating effects of war. Ask most people what the most beautiful city in Poland is, and most will say Krakow, but I disagree. I think it's Gdansk. This is the city's picturesque Motlawa River walk. That structure you see behind me is the Gdansk crane, also known as the Pedanian crane. It was built in the mid-14th century and was reconstructed between the years 1442 and 1444. And it's a really unique building in Europe because it's one of the few medieval wooden cranes that exists in Europe. And it served as not only a crane but also a city gate, and it was used to haul up goods from ships coming in as well as to help haul their masts up. You can see some wooden wheels up there and some rope. That's what was used to operate the crane. Now this wheel was actually powered by men running inside it, kind of like a hamster wheel. Kind of funny, but that's how they did it back then. This is Ulica Mariacka. It's one of the most famous streets in Gdansk, and famous for its cobblestone as well as its many amber stalls. Oh, this right here is amber.
And the white one is the most expensive. For 1,000 pieces, just one will be white. And it's the oldest amber. And more unique. So like this cabinet with the whites and blue, which the blue is really unique. So you can count.
Oh wow.
Oh, I like this one. Look. Oh, sorry. This one, it's jak to powiedzieć? To jest kora bursztynu. Jak to się mówi? Tak jak kora drzewa, to jest ta pierwsza warstwa bursztynu. Specjalnie zostawione właśnie to, bo to jest bardzo unikatowe. Ten kosztuje jakoś 800 zł, bo jest lżejszy. Ten jest bardzo ładny, bo to jest też unikatowy, taki jasny kamień. Mamy coś na zewnątrz ładnego jeszcze? Z takich słoni.
Behind me is the St. Mary's Cathedral. It was built between 1343 and 1502. It's one of the most famous landmarks in Gdansk, and it may not be the oldest church in Poland, but it is in fact the largest, and not only that, but it is the largest brick church in all of Europe. I'm inside the largest brick cathedral in Europe. Here's the church's beautiful astronomical clock. Now, even though the Dutch never actually occupied Gdansk, their architectural influence was very strong here. In fact, a lot of the buildings here were designed by Dutch architects. For a look at some of the region's earlier history, you can pay a visit to the Gdansk Archaeological Museum. Located on the city's famous Ulica Mariacka, the museum displays hundreds of artifacts dating from ancient all the way up to modern Pomerania. Items on display include, among other things, old pottery, urns, jewelry, coins, keys, plates, tools, smoking pipes, old fishing boats, human remains, and even this bizarre artifact, which is actually a small grave that was used to bury the ashes of those who had passed on. One of the museum's more unique artifacts is this 12th century pagan head carved from a single piece of granite, and this 16th century clay statue of the Virgin Mary. Another interesting item on display is this large warship, which dates between the 10th and 13th century. In addition to its many artifacts, the museum also contains a spectacular display of amber, like these spectacular pieces of amber furniture. Or this exhibit, which allows you to take a look at real insects trapped in real amber. Although the museum has devoted itself to Pomeranian history, it also includes a small exhibit of Sudan, which contains a depiction of nomadic lifestyle, as well as original Nubian petroglyphs and pieces of an original Nubian temple. And at the monument, the Polish post office defenders. Behind me is the Gdansk post office. It's still in use today, but this is one of the most important historical sites in the city, because on the first day of World War II, 56 people, 50 postal workers and 6 civilians fought to defend this post office against Nazi forces for 14 long hours, and they eventually had to surrender, but the post office was never taken by the Nazis, but it did leave several casualties, including a 10-year-old girl, Irvina, dead. They were actually forced to surrender, and they were able to escape, but later on all but 4 of the escapees were executed as illegal combatants. Now of the 56 fighters, 38 of them were executed by the Nazis. About 16 ended up wounded, of which 6 ended up dying of injury in the hospital. And today this very interesting looking monument stands here to honor those brave fighters who died defending the thing they loved most, the post office. This beautiful Gothic cathedral behind me is the Church of St. Bridget. It was built in 1374, and it's known as being a place of worship for members of the Solidarnosc movement. Now, this church is called the Church of St. Bridget because it was here that the remains of the visionary St. Bridget were displayed in 1374 as they were traveling from Rome to Sweden. Behind me is the Church of St. Catherine. It was built in 1227 by the Pomeranian dukes. Behind me is the Great Mill. It was built by the Teutonic Knights in 1350, and there were actually several mills in Gdansk, and this one is called the Great Mill because of its huge size. It was the largest mill in the city. Until the construction of the Raduna Canal in 1356, this mill was powered by 18 enormous water wheels, which were all operated with slave power. Right here is a statue of Jan III Sobieski. He's one of the most famous and most important kings in Poland. Behind me is Hala Targowa, which translates to bartering hall. It's the main shopping center here in the main city of Gdansk. This is where most of the tourists come to do their shopping. It's basically a shopping mall. Right here you also have an outdoor fruit market. And this is called the bartering hall because you can actually haggle and barter for a cheaper price. Aside from a shopping center, Hala Targowa also doubles as an archaeology museum, displaying artifacts that were dug up during its construction. I just love open-air fruit and vegetable markets like these.
Właśnie w pierwszym smaku jest niby super.
Ja sama w domu.
It's called Solidarity Square. Behind me is the monument of the fallen shipyard workers, one of the most important monuments in Gdansk, and it was erected on December 16th, 1980 to honor the 42 shipyard workers who died in protest 10 years earlier in 1970. There were protests in port cities all around Poland against communism, and 42 people were killed, and this monument was built to honor them. And what really sets this monument apart is that it is the first monument to the victims of communist oppression to be built in a communist country during the communist era. Behind me is the entrance to the Gdansk shipyard, which back in the communist era was known as the Lenin shipyard. Now, shipyards aren't usually tourist attractions, but this one is, because it is an important shipyard, because this is the birthplace of Solidarity, the Solidarnosc movement. It was founded on August 31st, 1980, under the leadership of Lech Wałęsa, and it was actually the first communist trade union to be established in a Warsaw Pact country, and this initiated strikes all over Poland and paved the way for future democracy, not only in Poland but for the entire Eastern Europe communist bloc. And it is said that by 1981 the movement had around 9.5 million people and was gaining up to $50 million financial support from the US. And this is where it all started right here. This is the reason Poland and Eastern Europe is no longer under communist rule, and after the fall of communism, Lech Wałęsa actually went on to become president of Poland. This plaque lists the names and ages of all the fighters who were killed during those protests. The youngest, a 15-year-old boy.
Treasure